Neha, thank you so much for talking to us. I want to, before I start asking you about Nimbu Sahib, it's a book release that's happening today. I want to ask you about writing. You know, tell us a little about how you got into writing and why army stories.
Thank you for that question, Geeta, and thank you for having me here. So writing actually came to me right after I lost my father in the war. I was a fairly a voracious reader for that age. When I was about, we lost him when I was about 12 years old. And so I used to read a lot of books that he used to keep buying for me. I remember those days we used to travel in trains, you know, and every station that we would stop at, he would get down, get me a book. So I used to read a lot. I think right after we lost him, or during that time, I started writing a diary. I think when he was in Srinagar, and I used to write a dear diary entries that I used to make. But once we lost him, I kind of changed it to dear daddy, because I think that was my way of trying to interact with him or trying to communicate with him. That's how writing essentially came about for me, if I have to be honest. Thereafter, I did keep you know, although I'm a doctor by profession, so it's not like I was doing a lot of, you know, serious writing until then. But then I think when social media came about, and you know, the whole posting and making statuses came about, is when I started, you know, sometimes writing more seriously. Sometimes we'd be asked to do some kind of an article for something. So that is when I actually kind of found my space and my comfort with it. And I also realized that there is an effect to it, right? When you write your perspective about something, a lot of the times you're able to kind of solve the assumptions that may be floating around about so many situations, right? So army stories, you know, since you asked me, this is definitely one of the areas that, of course, was always very personal to me too, right? Like again, there's so many assumptions about, you know, what's happening in our lives after we lose our loved ones, what's happening, what has happened before, you know, how are we coping through it. There was always a lot of chatter about it usually, but no real, I wouldn't read myself anything that would really make me feel, oh, okay, you know, this is what I'm feeling, you know. So I think in a sense that's where it came from. And then once you start writing and once you start seeing what the effect of that writing is, when people get to know about stories in the way that you expect them to know, I think that's what motivates you eventually.
You know, I was going to ask you about Dear Diary, and then you said you sort of took it to becoming Dear Dad. When you wrote that, how much of that, why did that somehow not translate into your first book? Because I know your first book was on Vijayan Thapar,
That's right.
know, who died in Kargil. So how come that didn't translate to this, and how did you, what was the connection between that and Vijayan Thapar?
I'm again very happy sort of that you asked me that question, because that's actually so Priya Ramani, we met Priya at the Kargil Vijay Divas in 2016. She actually offered me a Dear Daddy book. At that time she used to work for Juggernaut. And she said that I registered that you you know, you used to maintain a diary and that you're very articulate. What do you think about doing a Dear Daddy book? As a matter of fact, when I came back in 2016 from the Kargil Vijay Divas celebrations, I myself was thinking of doing a book. It had been some time since I'd been writing on posts also, and people would always ask me, you know, you should do a book now, you should do a book now, things like that. So actually, I do have sort of a half-written book there. And then she did ask me, and you know, I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that at that time, I think I kind of chickened out, you know. When it started becoming serious, the whole conversation, since I'm not a writer by profession, or I wasn't at that time for sure, I think the whole idea of doing an entire book by myself and finishing that project probably became daunting for me. That's when my sister did Letters from Kargil, and we were both offered that kind of she was offered that and I was offered this. And then I think, yeah, that's something that I kind of think that I missed. But I haven't given up on it yet, and we may see that book sometime.
So how did Vijayan Thapar happen then?
So again, around the same time, some of the samples of my writing were with different publishers, right? Like some Juggernaut had some, I'd also spoken to someone in Penguin. So I think around 2019, when Colonel Thapar wanted to do a book on his son's life, the editor that I was in conversation with at Penguin, she emailed me and asked me if I would be interested in doing this book. And of course, I was definitely interested in writing more about army stories, and we knew them personally as well. We used to meet them off and on, and so there was already a connect. And so I got on, and I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, what better opportunity than this to be able to do something that I've always really wanted to, and in a sense, it'll be a good learning experience as well.
Okay, and then coming to this book, how did you find out about your Captain Kenguruse, and how did you meet the family, and how did you come upon his story?
Interestingly, Captain Kenguruse is also in the same regiment as Captain Vijayan Thapar. So they were coursemates, and they were in fact 3 coursemates: Praveen Tomar, Vijayan Thapar, and Neikezhakuo Kenguruse, that got commissioned to 2 Rajif at that time. And out of those 3, only Colonel Praveen Tomar survived the war. So I had already heard of Neikezhakuo Kenguruse during my research for Vijayan at Kargil. And my sister, whose first book was Letters from Kargil, she had also published some of his letters from that time. So we both had a sense of, Neikezhakuo Kenguruse. He'd come up in our conversations. But, his family is from Nagaland. They're all settled there. None of them are here, actually. So we didn't know about him at all. And he's a Maha Vir Chakra awardee. Yeah. So, this thing, I think, was there inside both of us in some way. And when we were in Kargil Vijay, there were celebrations in 2021. Their family, Atule, and with him 2 more of his siblings, they had come to Atule's, Captain Kenguruse's brother. Yeah. So he had come for the celebrations, and we were looking at them. And I remember Diksha, my sister, she kept telling me, I think this is, Captain Kenguruse's family. I was like, yeah, maybe, yeah, it looks like. And around the same time, we also had another officer called Brigadier Mohit Saxena, 2 Rajif officer, who had interviewed during my research for Vijayan at Kargil. So he then, introduced us. Turns out Atule was also looking at us. And I think he must have heard that we've written some books and all. And, when you're coming from that kind of a story, you also don't feel very comfortable sharing it with anybody. Yeah. So in that way, Diksha and I have always kind of, I don't know if saying enjoyed is the right word, but we have kind of always had that faith that comes about easily from other brave hearts families to ours, right? So when we ask them, and because we have the same kind of story, there's a connect. It's easier. The conversations, the flow is easier. And there are a lot of cathartic moments. I remember we were sitting in Kohima with the entire Kenguruse family, and towards the end his father spoke to us in his language, which was getting translated by Atule. And all of us were sitting, and I mean, we had to take breaks because we would break down so often, right? And so yes, in that way it's a very, very special experience. And so when we realized that, okay, this is the family, we got in touch, we got introduced. Diksha kind of moved ahead first. She told Atule that, have you spoken to anybody about the book, and we would want to do his story. He said, I want to do his story, but I've also been looking. And so it just, it was like an unsaid deal that was said that day, and then we followed through on it.
I've gone through your book, and I just wanted to understand the reason that you've written it the way you have.
Yeah.
It's not your story, it's the story told by a brother. And of course, you've interviewed other people, but it's his voice.
It's from his perspective.
Why did you choose to write it like that?
Great question again. This, I think, I have been thinking this for a while now. Since we've been writing stories of brave hearts, this is my 3rd book. And I realized that, we often talk about the loss of a father, mother, sisters, wife, children. We usually don't talk a lot about the loss of a sibling. And I have a sibling, and we are very close. And, it often, it is a little, not, I wouldn't say disturbing, but it used to make me a bit uncomfortable. Why don't we talk about him? Yeah. And Atule was a point of contact. And when we started talking to him about his story on the phone, we realized that his life practically changed because of what happened, right? And essentially, I think it was his life that changed the most. So, and also it worked well that Diksha and I both are siblings. We wanted to write their story. He was wanting to write a story about his brother. So again, we had that connect as siblings wanting to write a story of siblings. And again, that came about very beautifully. And we thought, what is a better voice than the narrator that is his brother and from his perspective.
When you're writing a book, you said that there are moments when you actually, everybody broke down and cried and stuff like that. Yeah. This is your 2nd book that you've written about people who've lost, you spoke to the families, written about the loved ones who died in war. Yeah. What has your journey been like in terms of discovering not just the connect, but also a common theme that you find that's reoccurring in your choice of people? Is it a conscious choice, first of all, that you want to only write about people from the army and people who've lost their loved ones, or a story of valor and heartbreaks and hardship both? Armies, it's all about that. And also in terms of, are you looking for something when you're writing?
Interesting. So I think it's, when we're writing about brave hearts, for sure, there is a slight choice there, because we personally connect to it, because for a long time my father is a Kargil War braveheart too, and he's a Sena Medal awardee as well, and for a really long time we missed his name in stories that were told. And we couldn't see it a lot, and sometimes we would see it, sometimes we wouldn't, but we would keep looking for it, right, until in 2015 is when Diksha wrote his story on her own storytelling platform, my sister. And then we started realizing that, okay, then people, in the age of social media, like I told you, we realized that when the stories reach people, they take notice, and then you kind of then you start talking to, and why shouldn't we? There are certain stories that are told and retold, right, and we see that whether it was in our textbooks or later, or and Kargil War in our generation is the one war that we've seen as a generation.
It was the first televised war of the country.
Correct, right? So essentially, I do believe that every story is special. I do believe that every story definitely has something to teach. But we also realized from our story, when we realized it was us who wrote it, and then, right? But how many people can be expected to write it by themselves, right? But they all have one, most of the times. So I think one thought is that definitely if someone wants to tell a story and they cannot do it themselves, I'm all for it. I understand that not everyone wants to share their stories, which is fine too. But I do think that coming from the place I am, and coming from the background that I am, with the understanding that I have and the life that I've led, I do think that I am in a kind of a position to do justice to those stories. And I understand the thought behind it, and I understand not just how inspirational it can be to the person reading it, but how cathartic it is for the person to tell the story as well. And I think it's a beautiful process, and I think it's a beautiful experience. I really treasure all the interviews that I've done, reminiscing about these brave young men. And like you said, there are certain commonalities, how driven they were, especially these young guys, right, the early 20s, they were all so driven. They all had like such big dreams, they wanted to do something for the country, and so that's always there. And we always see that in their conversations with their families, they would always underplay the war, or what's happening around them, and in that sense kind of keeping them comfortable at all times. So it's always so nice to kind of discover that also, and just be in the, I think it's a matter of great privilege and honor to be able to be sitting in a place where someone trusts you with their story, gives you that much faith, and and then you become the medium for their story to come out. I really treasure it a lot.
Something just really struck me. You wrote the story of Vijay Thapa in 2016.
2019 I wrote it, so we released in 20.
Yeah, but I'm saying that, he was known, and because his father's in Delhi, he's also an ex-army officer, and he has really been somebody who's go-getter. I've met him, we've all interviewed him. So Delhi stories he got told, and from the army thing. Same with Captain Kenguruse. He's in Nagaland. You found him again through Kargil. Why haven't you written on your dad? Why he's a Kargil hero? He's somebody I would think you would be writing first, because, or is it too close for you?
No. Firstly, in Diksha's book, Letters from Kargil, there is a fair amount of mention of my father, his letters to us, our letters to him, and you can kind of piece the story together. Then she's done some articles I've written on him too. I think that while, again, like I said, there is a half-written book somewhere which should find the light of the day sometime soon, but it's just that that's not our only aim, to tell our father's story, right? We do tell his story every now and then, right? We still have the kind of access or privilege or resource to kind of keep talking about him now, and we continue to. We tell his stories when we speak to people like you, or we write about it ever so often. We are documenting it and we have actually consciously kind of kept him alive now over the past few years, talking about him. So I think we are doing that already. Should we do a book? Yes, possibly I actually want to do a book on my mother's story, like from her perspective, something like that. And that's definitely, like I said, we'll probably do this again a few years down the line, and we'll be talking about that book hopefully.
Right. So okay, now this is the 25th anniversary of Kargil. You've written books. You've had a personal story about Kargil. I don't want to talk a lot about your Nimbu Sahib book because I want people to read that book, and it's there. So that aspect, of course, is there. But I do want you to tell me, as somebody who's lost a parent at 12 in a war, it's 25 years now. You have somehow landed up writing about people connected to that war. You have your own personal story. What is it that you think about it when you look back, or how would you look at these 25 years? I'm probably not being able to articulate my question. It's just about this whole 25 years, the Kargil War, the young men, all of that, the treachery of Pakistan. How do you look at all of that? Or is it more human for you, the war?
It is definitely more human to me, Geeta, to answer you clearly. 25 years is a lifetime. It is a lifetime. I was 12, which means I'm more than double the age of when I was, what I was when I lost him. And this question actually I've thought of so many, because I've been asked this also. And I keep thinking, that life is so different now than what it was 25 years back. I mean, these days we really, often tend to think about what would he have done in this case, what would he have done in that situation. Those kind of things definitely come about. We realize that, we've spent a lifetime without him. But in some sense, it seems like just about yesterday that, we just got the phone call, or we just found out about him, and, how difficult it seemed. It didn't, I mean, I couldn't, if someone would have told me at that time that this is what I would be doing 2 decades down the line, I probably wouldn't have believed it, because it just seemed so hard. It seemed so hard to just even speak about him, let alone, write and, tell everything about him. But I think that's what time does for you. It helps you deal with the loss. It replaces it with a little bit of pride. It never goes away. There is a vacuum that stays. But I think if you really want to, you learn to do better things with it. And I think in that sense, he's definitely our motivation. Every time, me and my sister, we talk about it so often that every once in a while we're thinking like this, that, okay, what else can we do, to, at the end of the day, we want to be known as Major CB Dwivedi, Sena Medal's daughters, right? That's definitely still our, the cherry on the cake for us, or that's our crown that we wear. And it's all in his name, and it's all because of him, and it's all for him, and he's the motivation around everything.
And these books really go a long way in helping that.
I hope so. It definitely, as the writer of these books, for sure, there's a lot of satisfaction that comes out of it.
And also, the fact that I notice that every time they write about the author, the thing that always comes is also, your personal line that she's a daughter of a Kargil veteran herself, and I think that is anyways a very plus thing. So thank you so much, Neha, for talking to us, and it was really a pleasure, and I really loved the book.
Thank you,
I wish it all the best, and we hope to get to see many more other books coming from you.
Yes, and I hope so too. Thank you so much, and thank you for doing this with us today.
No, thank you so much. Thanks.